Seen her testify last week in front of Congress. She is a total hero and a friend of mine. And I gotta say, last week she came on my show and we both cried. But we cried also because it's finally coming out. Children are going to now be saved because of this woman's fearlessness. Her and another whistleblower, DHS, came out and they were not afraid of losing their jobs. They were more afraid of losing children. So I gotta tell you, Tara Rodas is a hero right now in America. She is just getting started, and she's here today to tell you exactly what's going on at the border. Thank you, my friend. Such a hero. Get used to her face.
Wow. Wow. I just cannot tell you what an honor and a privilege it is for me to be standing here today. And I can tell you, I never imagined that I would be standing here today in 2021 when I opened my computer and I saw an advertisement to all federal employees that said, hey, we need your help with the crisis on the southern border. If you're a federal employee, we're asking you to volunteer to leave your agency and go serve with Health and Human Services to reunite children with sponsors here in the United States. And I thought to myself, my husband, who is from El Salvador, I'm a Spanish speaker. Mi español no es perfecto, pero yo puedo hablar. I can talk, right, in Spanish. And I thought, you know, how many federal employees can actually speak Spanish? How many federal employees would be able to help the children? And so I made a decision to apply to go to the border to do what I thought was to help place children in loving homes. That's what I thought. And a lot of other federal employees did the same thing. We wanted to help. So I get mobilized to Pomona, California, and I was at the Pomona Fairplex, if you've had the opportunity to see any of the exposés, but over 8,000 children were processed through that facility in less than 6 months. So 8,000 children were sent to homes in less than 6 months. Now, if you can imagine, I mean, how much vetting process or how much investigation can go into sending children to a home when you're sending that many in that little amount of time, right? Does that make sense to anybody? Right. So when we started looking into some of these cases, it was very strange that a person would be applying for a child, and then we discover, well, that person has applied for several children. And then we started to discover that, well, there are 40 children or 50 children in an apartment complex. Well, how could that be if they're going to be with their family members, right? I mean, that doesn't make sense to anybody. And then we're looking into some cases and we're finding that there are, in some places in Houston, Texas, is anybody here from Texas? Great state of Texas? Okay, hey, Texas people. Okay, we found that there's a place, and right over there too, there's a place in Houston, Texas, that has over 350 children that have been released from this program in less than a 3-mile radius. So, I am not an investigator. I'm not a data analyst, but I do have a little common sense. And I thought, that doesn't pass the common sense test, right? So, what I think is important to note, because this story is not about me, but there is one thing that I think would be important for you to know, is that I've been a federal employee for more than 20 years. I consider it a high honor to serve in the United States government. I consider it a privilege to be able to spend my career helping other people, and that 17 of those years have been spent in the Inspector General community. And in the IG community, if you know anything about the Inspector General community, in the IG community, we combat fraud, waste, and abuse. That's what we do. The Inspector General community would not even exist if there was no fraud in the government, because that's all we look at is fraud, waste, and abuse. That's what we do. Now, tonight, I want to make sure I'm very clear. I'm not speaking to you right now on behalf of the Inspector General community or my job there. What I'm speaking to you on behalf is what I witnessed when my agency gave me the permission to go help Health and Human Services reunite children. And what I found is that they're not reuniting these children with families. So it can be a very hard leap for people to understand trafficking of children. This is looking into a very dark subject. For those of you who work in this area, I'm so humbled that so many people have been in this fight for so long. So many of you sitting here are heroes. And I think that the reason it's hard for people to think about child trafficking is that, as other people have mentioned, people want to say this is a conspiracy theory. But let me just ask you, just raise your hand. Does anybody think there's a thing called drug trafficking? Anybody think so? Yep, that's what I thought. Okay. Anybody think there's a thing as gun trafficking? Right? Okay, see? Smart people here. Everybody told me when I was going to sign up to come here, there's going to be a lot of smart people here. Now, what if I told you with drug trafficking, it's a one-time use? Okay, one-time use. So let's pretend, and I know you would never do this, but let's pretend you're trafficking drugs from Guatemala. So you're manufacturing your drugs in Guatemala. You then have to get your drugs all the way across Mexico. That means you've got to somehow use the cartel, pay them off in order to get to the US border. Then you may have seen shows where we actually have law enforcement on the border who catch some of those drugs, right? So the trafficker, with his drugs, he loses some of his product as he gets over the border. But then that drug trafficker still, he's got to guard his product all the way down his distribution chain. That drug trafficker has to guard his product to his end user so that he can make as much money as he possibly can off of a one-time use. Okay. Now I want you to think about a child and why it is more profitable for these unscrupulous people to traffic children. Okay, so now let's pretend we're in Guatemala. And I love the Guatemalan people. I've been there, okay? I've traveled extensively in El Salvador and Mexico, and I love the Guatemalan people, which is why I'm very horrified about what I'm about to share with you. So imagine you're the child trafficker now in Guatemala. The only thing you have got to do is get to the US border. That's it. Because once you get your child to the US border, you then turn your child, your product. Understand, these people view a child as an asset. It is a commodity to them. It is income that they will be able to earn, and that's how they view it. And that's a wicked thing. It's a wicked thing to know people view it that way. But once all they have to do is get their product to the border. Once they get their product to the border, the United States government at Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement, takes the child. Then, with your tax dollars, the Office of Refugee Resettlement sends that child. Everybody remember, you were hearing about those midnight flights that were going on. There were airplanes going all around the country. Nobody could find out who were on the manifests of these flights. Well, they were children that your tax dollars were flying to sponsors. So your tax dollars, not the trafficker now, right? So the trafficker has built in the United States government into their business plan. These traffickers are smart. They're about making money. And they say, well, if the United States government is going to guard my product over the border And the United States government is going to guard my product, and the United States government is going to deliver my product directly to my end user, the trafficker says, that's a pretty good deal for me. It's a pretty good deal for me. Now, if that was the end of the story, that would be bad enough. I think we could all agree that's not what we want our tax dollars going to. But friends, what is the most horrible part of this is that the person who gets the child on the end, it's not a one-time use. When a child is delivered to a sponsor, they get to use the child over and over and over again. I cannot stress this enough. This is a horrible, dark well to begin to look into. And some people will say, well, Tara, how do you know that's true? How do you know they're using the kids like that? Well, anybody read the New York Times lately? I wouldn't consider the New York Times to be like a right-wing conspiracy newspaper. I don't know about you, but that's not what I think of when I think of the New York Times. But if you've been following a reporter at the New York Times, Hannah Dreier, you will see the reporting that she's done about these children who are not only working here, but dying here. These children are working in slaughterhouses. They are working overnight shifts. They are working in warehouses and all kinds of dangerous jobs where not only are these kids working here, they're dying here. And that's because their sponsors are putting them to work. The sponsors are not like, wow, welcome to the United States. You're going to get to go to school now. You're going to get to learn the language. We're going to assimilate you into our society and really give you this great opportunity. These children, most of them have to quit school to pay their debt to the cartels. And people might say, is that believable? But did anybody see James O'Keefe and Project Veritas's expose on this? Okay. So the children say, when they go knock on the door, what's happening to you? The children are saying, I'm being pimped out by my sponsor in the house where I'm living. My sponsor is telling me that she's my aunt, but I don't know. I've never met her. Other children, I've had to quit my job. Quit go to school. I can't go to school anymore because I have to pay my debt to the cartel. There are sponsors who have received 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 children. How is this possible? Now, what's another very interesting thing to me that I did not know before I deployed to help this mission is that the Department of Health and Human Services is a $2.7 trillion agency. They actually get 1/5 of the entire budget of the United States. So the entire budget. So I know a lot of you have been in the CPS fight for a while. That's also Department of Health and Human Services. So they get 1/5 of the budget. Now, how is it that if you get 1/5 of the budget that you cannot care for children? How is that possible? I think there are questions that we really need to start asking. And seeing people here like this, it's just so, it gives me such hope because one voice makes a difference. And your voice can make a difference. If you know my story, then you heard that a whistleblower, I know I can't say former Marine because you're never a former Marine, right? But a Marine who worked for the Department of Homeland Security started to see in early 2021 that these children, their sponsors, so-called sponsors, were members of transnational criminal organizations that were actually on something called the TOC watch list, which is transnational organized crime. Okay, see, these are bad people. These are not people that we want to be having in the United States, right? We have to put them on a watch list, but that we're actually giving children to them. So Aaron Stevenson is a hero. And what happened to Aaron for coming forward to say, hey, we're giving children to known dangerous criminals? Well, he was canceled, he was silenced, he was censored, he's no longer employed with Department of Homeland Security. But what Aaron did with his voice is, when his story aired, I was sitting on the Pomona Fairplex emergency intake site looking at cases, and I hear him say, hey, transnational organized criminals are getting these children. And I thought, oh my goodness, how could this get any worse than it already is? And when I started looking and sharing the information around the site, I found that, yes, indeed, we actually had the case on our site of a known MS-13 affiliated person who was sponsoring a child from our site and simultaneously trying to get a child from the Fort Bliss emergency intake site. So I thought, this is absolutely unbelievable that the government, knowing full well we're giving children to criminal actors, is still sending children to criminal actors. Now, some people might say, well, Tara, okay, understand this is a terrible thing. Children are being labor trafficked. Children are being sex trafficked. But, you know, in the end, I mean, how does this affect my life? You know, in the end, I want to make sure that when you leave here, that in addition to knowing the horrors of what's happening to these vulnerable children on your tax dollar, that it affects you because you have children who go to school with these children who are being trafficked by these sponsors. So you have a birthday party for one of your kids, and you invite the kids in the neighborhood over, and you might not realize that one of the kids who's at this party is one of these girls who's actually been trafficked here for sex. And she is responsible for recruiting other people into the group that's being trafficked for sex. Now, the other thing that I didn't mention was the woman who was the sponsor, who was MS-13 related, woman, female. A lot of times the traffickers of the children are women. So you're thinking, I'm having the birthday party, and this child is coming over of this single mom, and you're starting to build relationships, and you don't realize you're building a relationship with a high-level criminal actor who is after your child. People do not understand. There are a lot of situations where they're using these children once they bring them here and they put them into these operations, that their next step is to go after your children as well. Now, even if that wasn't the case, even if they were not targeting your kids, the fact that there's one United States cent, 1 penny that is spent to lure children here to what they believe is a better life, lure them here, and we take them into our custody, and then we fly them to people who abuse them for labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and other unspeakable things, is unacceptable. And this is why I'm saying one voice makes a difference. You can begin to ask your local legislators, where are the children? Where is the money that's being, how are you all spending this money that we're giving you to protect the children? I see you're flying the kids around on late night flights to so-called sponsors. What I want to know is, where are the children and are they safe? What's happening to these children? These are your tax dollars. These are government programs that you have every right to ask about. And there is, I understand, there is a lot of censorship, right? Lately, when Schellenberger and Taibbi went before the Weaponization Committee. Did anybody hear that by any chance? Okay. These are not what we would consider like right-wing conspiracy theorists, right? But they are discredited. Anyone who does not follow the narrative that the government knows best is considered a conspiracy theorist. They should put on a tinfoil hat, you know, but you can look at the data. I would encourage people, get informed. Understand how the government is actually spending your money. I mean, if you go on the Office of Refugee Resettlement site, you can see where these kids are going. You can see how many of them actually came into your district or into your city, your zip code. But what's interesting is they don't tell you who those sponsors are. But these are great things to be able to ask your legislator. Well, who are the sponsors of these kids? What do we know about them? Are they criminal actors? So these are all things that I think together, if we start asking these questions, they're going to have to start giving answers. So I found it very interesting, the congressional hearing, that the former person from Office of Refugee Resettlement, Mr. Kerry, admitted that the people doing these vetting, supposed vetting of sponsors, they're not law enforcement and they're not investigative. So who would, in their right mind, give a child to anyone they have not investigated or looked into their background? This does not make sense, right? This does not make sense. So I could go on for hours and hours, but I know that we want to bring up the panel so that you have the opportunity to ask questions. But I do want to say that there are children today who are in crisis. Today, right now, just like I said before Congress, there are children who are working overnight shifts right now. They are being labor trafficked. They are being abused on their jobs. They're working dangerous jobs around bone crushers. Some children are dying on the job. There are stories of children being killed by falling off an earth mover, you know, a teen. We've got middle schoolers who are getting chemical burns, working in slaughterhouses. We have teens who've fallen off roofs their first week here in the United States. This is unacceptable. And one voice, your voice, can make a difference. Today, there are children who are being sold for sex. Your voice can make a difference. So I just thank you all so much. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be here today. Seeing so many people concerned about this issue gives me hope, because there is hope. We can start asking the questions, we can get the answers, and these are things that can change the life of a child and change the life of potentially the children in your own home if they get recruited into any of this bad activity. So thank you all for just everything that you're doing in this fight. I'm just humbled to be a part of this crowd. I give everybody who put this conference together just 5 gold stars for what they're doing. And I just have to say, I give God thanks for helping me walk this path all this time. And my husband thanks for standing by me and helping me through this hard time. So thank you all. Go out and use your voice to make a difference.
You are my hero. Thank you so much for going out there on Capitol Hill amongst the wolves. Thank you for doing that. We love you. We appreciate you. And really, it helped us because we've been trying to get this truth out there, and this has really brought it to the forefront. So we can't really call it a conspiracy theory anymore. So we're going to do our Q&A. So we have some questions for them. I wanted to make sure that you guys knew Liz Crokin